Thank you, Liz, and let me start by saying special thanks to Liz and Kurt for setting all this up and for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to you today. I am Ritchie Schacher. I work with IBM's Bluemix DevOps services. I've been in that space for about 3 years now. Prior to that, my background was in development tools, team collaboration, source control management, tracking and planning, and we've taken our experience from building products on premises in the past to moving towards more of a cloud-based model and hosting DevOps tooling in the cloud. I come primarily from a background in development and SRE. While we've been owning and managing services now in the cloud for a few years, SRE is something relatively new to me, and I think it's a truly exciting space. And with me today is Rob. You want to?
Does this work? Okay, I'm Rob Orr. I manage the SRE team for the DevOps services. I came from primarily a development and then an operations background. I guess I have to get it closer like that. Oh, walk over here? Yep. Okay. Oh, she's looking at the camera. Oh, like this? Like a rock star? Okay. Am I a rock star? Okay. So my primary background was in customers, development, and service and operations. And I came into this job to lead the SRE team with, a lot of not liking Ritchie. I didn't really like Ritchie because I'd been working with him on the operations side, and he always came into my environment and broke it.
Well, Rob was constantly blocking our deployments and dragging me into review meetings to explain why we had an outage and things like that.
So now then my executive decided to put Ritchie and I together since we liked each other so much, and we wanted to kind of smash the operations and the development engineering teams together for the services and make us actually like each other. So here we are 6 months later at a talk on the same podium and not, giving each other these evil looks like we would do in executive conferences. Yep. So the agenda we're going to talk about, we did a little introduction. We're going to show our abstract, the problem statement. Our executives actually literally said on a Monday you're going to have an SRE team. Now what are we going to do? Picked Ritchie on a Friday and have him start on a Monday. We're going to go through the different model that we use. We used a lot of the Google book, a lot of the SRE conference information. I attended a couple of these conferences. What were our motivations? What model we choose and why we chose a certain model that we did. We did a little bit of a hybrid approach. And then we went through how we implemented it, how we went through a staged model, iterative model, and then we wrapped it up with, we're going to wrap up the session with kind of what mistakes did we make and what are the types of pitfalls, if we had to do it over again, we want to avoid.
Mm-hmm. So this is just a copy of the abstract. You've probably seen it already because you're here.
Not with the guy on the right.
That was me. So this literally was me. As I said, my background is in development. We had been practicing DevOps. We had been managing services in the cloud for a few years, but I hadn't seen it quite from the operational side as much as Rob had. But they tapped me for this because they wanted to bring a development perspective into what we're doing. We did have some people who had built their careers in operations. We've had it's been an effort to transform the team to get them more into the engineering mindset, have them more in code. But what happened was they were organizing this, and Rob had an architect lined up, and the guy, for whatever reason, backed out of the opportunity, or he had a different opportunity come along a few days before he was scheduled to start. So they literally asked me if I would do this on a Thursday, gave me Friday to think about it, and over the weekend I came in on Monday and gave them my decision, and then they announced it later that day. So that was me going, okay, what now? And what I found was, while I was elated about the opportunity, the honeymoon lasted a really short period of time, and within a few days people were starting to ask for little things like dates and roadmaps and checklists and scorecards and risk assessments and all sorts of things. So what this is just kind of what we've learned as we've matured our SRE team and how we would do it over again if we had the opportunity. So Rob, you want to lead in with this one?
Yeah, if I can read it. So what are the motivations? Well, obviously the primary motivation was availability of our service. Our service started getting a lot of customers and a lot of scale, a lot of environments, and the teams are starting to struggle and expend a lot of toil. right? A lot of labor, not a lot of automation. We constantly found our development teams and our management teams up all hours of the night, probably very similar to why you all are here in the session today, right? And we started seeing lots of issues with, like, how quickly could we respond? We were getting people really worn out. They'd be on call successive nights, and we would have successive issues. The engineers really weren't getting the time it takes to come back in the morning and really spend the time to correct what happened last night, because the dev squad leaders, the service leaders were on them about completing their sprints, completing their features. So a lot of our motivation was our scale and the customers. Go ahead, Richard.
And yeah, just implementing more discipline in our processes. So, for example, making sure we had the RCA done after the incident, that everybody didn't just go to bed and forget about it. Making sure that we actually had action items that came out of that RCA. Making sure that those action items were tracked and that they actually got closed, so that the problems that we saw the night before weren't going to happen again.
And two of the issues that the executive team were focused on was budgeting SRE work, coming up with a budgeting model, the 50-50 model, so that they could create more predictability in the sprint velocity of the service teams, as well as avoiding the burnout. We had specific engineers. We'd have an issue, and you'd always gravitate towards one engineer to solve that issue. And he'd get woken up at 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock and then 6 o'clock, and then he'd keep at it. Eventually, he would burn out. And so we saw the development teams, the typical mantra of, we just go to Simon all the time. Simon, Simon, Simon all the time. And he just was there, he was a trooper, but at some point Simon's going to wear out. So we wanted to really create that pipeline of engineers that could actually come in, and we could go out one after the other. So we weren't wearing people out. We could have people, instead of running, jogging or walking.
Yeah. The other one is the separation of concerns from development priorities. So the way our team is structured, and by the way, we're just one of many teams inside of IBM. It's a big company, a lot of stuff happening in the cloud. And the way we're talking about SRE today is how we've chosen to adopt it for our team. But in our structure, right, Rob reports straight to the VP. Separate from the development director. He's peer to the development director, so that we're able to give objective opinions on our readiness posture and risk and availability and things of that sort. Because like in a lot of organizations, there's always pressure to get features out and to get them out quickly, and we have to balance that with the need to maintain the reliability and the compliance of our services.
And also, a lot of the development team was really afraid of that very last 4 characters, BCDR. They didn't really understand how to do business continuity, which is different than high availability, and how to do disaster recovery planning. The development teams were scared of that. They didn't know what it meant. Everyone had a different view on it, and you needed to basically set a common narrative on what your disaster recovery plan would be. How do you back up your data? How do you verify you do backups? Those type of things. And a lot of that wasn't going on in a common way.
In a consistent way.
Inconsistent way, yeah.
And documented, right. So what I describe here is sort of a staged approach of building your SRE team out in a managed way. And I think this is would have been effective for us whether we were coming from a DevOps model or whether we were coming from a traditional operations and development split. As it was for us, we were practicing DevOps, but we still had a squad that was committed to primarily operational tasks in support of development. And we chose a rotational model for bringing development engineers into our SRE team and transforming the skill sets of our operations engineers. And the idea here is that as you mature, you can ramp up and you can increase your scale and eventually increase your velocity and the impact to the business. And to be realistic, that initially, while you're laying the groundwork, while you're laying that foundation and figuring out what your mission is and what you're going to do, you might actually see slower velocity, but that should improve and scale. And the other key point here is that this is not meant to be, a waterfall method. This is iterative. You don't necessarily have to finish one stage before you go on to the next, but it just gives you things to think about and a way for us to take things in a managed order.
And what we found was a lot of our teams were wanting to finish like a fully blown tool. Everyone, wanting on the weekend and a week's worth of work, and they would say they needed a month or two. And I would basically, the idea to iterate, just get it good enough so we can actually put some data in there, roll it out to the rest of the team, and then iterate it over and over again. Our engineering teams always wanted to finish it, put all the polish on it before anyone would use some of our internal tooling, particularly around our root cause analysis tooling, as well as some of our incident management tooling. And so we just tried to just get it good enough, try it, even if it was some manual process to start with. Like one of the ones we came into the situation where we had change management. We had that weekly change management call that everybody gets on that no one wants to go to, and that people were showing up the change management call ill-prepared. And so we just ditched the whole idea of change management call. We just created a Slack channel and said we do change management all day long. And we took the change management tool, got rid of it, and just started using Git and something very intimate to our developers. So the developers didn't have to do anything different. But to make that to work, we just tried it. We just went out there and did it and kept making it better and better.
So in the very first stage, right, and this is something that we learned after we made our announcement that we were moving to SRE and after we started rotating engineers in, is that a number of people within our organization were not yet clear on what our mission and scope was, what our responsibilities were versus their responsibilities. And therefore, you know, I think the common theme throughout this talk is about having clarity of purpose and clarity of scope, and about managing people's expectations. And if you do that, things will run a lot smoother and build more of a collaborative relationship versus an adversarial one with what I'll refer to as the service teams, where the service teams are the teams that are actively developing features and service work. So the very first thing is just know who your leadership team is, and before you even bring the engineers in, define who your managers are, who your technical architect is going to be, who your technical leads are going to be in particular focus areas such as security, monitoring, logging, and start working together with that leadership team on a daily basis to flesh everything else out. Define what your core values are, how you're going to motivate your team. And then defining the roles and responsibilities. This is what SRE is going to do. This is what the service squads are responsible for. For example, we are not, necessarily their customer support team, and we're not their functional test team, although test harnesses and chaos testing and those sorts of things are things that we will facilitate for them. Actually going in and writing their unit tests is outside of our scope. But making those things clear so they don't have an expectation of, oh, well, I can just give everything to SRE that I don't want to do, or that we don't want to do, or we don't have time to do.
So one of the things we did was we started looking at trying to build some scorecards and benchmarks. And this is actually an example of one of our scorecards in the bottom where we actually went and rated each service's maturity. And we wanted to create just this really simple color code. We wanted to get out of the gate really fast. We did this the first few weeks. And wanted to show to our executive team which of their services and what shape they were in so we could set their expectations correctly. And the items on the left-hand side that purposely you can't read are certain things like chaos testing. Do you have incident management? Do they have PagerDuty groups? Do they, how are they doing monitoring? Do they rapidly test their APIs? Do they do all those common things that we all know to do? But we wanted to graphically represent it so that our executive could see whether, what each service was in good shape or bad shape. And there's a lot of green, there's a lot of yellow, and a lot of red. And we prioritized it, and it allowed our executive team and our stakeholders to get an understanding of the value we're providing, and also allowed us to show progression. So we could do this every month or so, and then and what we want to do is turn this into like an API model where we gather this data from a programmatic perspective versus a human toil perspective. And we'll talk later about we call the levels. We found out when we tried this approach that we set the bar so high to get SRE support that a lot of engineering teams lack the energy to try to do the work. They just said, well, we'll just do it. They said, whoa, we'll just do it. So we tried to set a more of a staged approach versus a we do SRE or we don't do SRE. You're on your own versus we do it. So we tried to do a staged approach, which is working very well, and we'll get into that in some later slides. So go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, and the last one, the buy-in. I think the buy-in is important. Once you have the roles and responsibilities defined and you understand what your scope is, make sure that everyone else understands it as well and that they agree, and give them an opportunity to give feedback. Or that is how we chose to do it, was to meet with the development managers and the squad leads separately and independently and go through it with each of them, take their feedback, go back and iterate and improve.
And you always find you have difficult managers, you have difficult peers to deal with, like we have one today as an example. But then we have other peers that have really bought in, and we actually use them as allies to go work on that difficult manager. I was actually going to create a slide to how to deal with a difficult team, but I decided not to. But there's always that difficult team that's difficult to manage. They always, just try to throw roadblocks and derailing factors in front of you. And the best way to do it is if you work with multiple teams, get the other teams to gang up on them. That seems to be very effective in playbacks and meetings.
So here's another example. So one of the things we did, with the leadership team is we sat down and we documented all what our values are. Hopefully you can see, read the font from the back of the room, but if not, I think the slides will be published after the conference. But first and foremost, we are obsessed with our availability and reliability. So, Rob reinforced this when I joined the team. He would jokingly come in and say, Ritchie, how did our service do last night? And I'd just be opening up my laptop and starting to check my email, and he would hit me with that, and just beating it into me that everybody, not just us, the service squads as well, we should, when you're hosting something on the web, on the cloud, we should all be obsessed with what is our service doing, and we should know, what's going on, and if there was an incident, what happened. We are an engineering team, and we promote a high-performance culture. So again, we have people with a diverse set of backgrounds, some, coming from primarily an operations model, and we're working to change that and to get them skilled up, to get them in the code, working with the individual services, thinking more along the lines of automation, not to just say, oh, well, that's something we need development to do. Right.
So when we came into this, we took two cultures and smashed them together. And so the engineers that came into our team thought they were going to the operations team. They were going to be put on call 24/7, and they were frightened. And so what we wanted to do is, and this is just our values. It's just not every other team should have their own values. But we wanted to show the engineering team that we really valued their engineering work, and we didn't mean to put them on the on-call 24/7. We wanted to make it so that they had tools and methodologies to keep them from getting woken up at night, just like any other DevOps team. So automation, first responders, run books, those type of things.
Yeah.
And they were really nervous because they had seen that common operations team or that common infrastructure team getting woken up and dealing with putting their fingers in the dike and not really having many tools at their disposal. And we just created a values to show that we wanted to protect their time off. We wanted to do like no less than 8 people on call. If you get called out more than twice, you're taken off call. Those type of things. We found one time we put me on call with 7 of us. It's I got Friday night every night, every week. So that was bad. But really to smush them together, it was important to actually write all that down for our engineers. So both our engineers on the ops side and the dev side could understand where we were going. And a lot of times they would say, Rob, that's great, but we've tried this before. How is this different, right? And you make it different by not only making, you set your values, you adhere to your values, you don't compromise, you bend, but you don't break. And then we changed our reporting structure, as Ritchie said, to really demonstrate to the team that we were not just a dev squad that was the cleanup crew. We were the guys that finished the use case testing, that finished the performance testing. We really wanted to come at this a lot different. So we looked at it from all respects.
Yeah. Yeah. The other key point that I want to make sure comes out of that is that we are partners with the development squads, with the service squads. And our engineers understand what our services do. They need to know how to use them. They need to know what is the user experience, and our focus has to be on the customer experience. Because it's a DevOps tools site, that there's a lot of facets and dimensions to it. And while our tools are relatively easy to use, nonetheless, we have engineers who maybe if their focus is on systems and infrastructure and low-level things, we still want them to know how the service works and how to use it and how to validate it. And it's not an us versus them conversation. We also respect the autonomy of the service squad. So our engineers are incredibly bright, they're opinionated, and they're good at what they do in the service squads. And we have to respect that, right? If we just go to them with a bunch of thou shouts, then all it does is build up, resentment. And they actually bring a number of good ideas to.
We tried
what
that. We
do.
did send them some thou shalts, and it did build up a lot of resentment, and it created a wall. And we saw that, a wall between the service squads and the SRE squads, and turning us into an operations team. So we stopped that, straight away. And that's another thing is we did a lot of retrospectives with the teams to spot behaviors that we didn't like, and talking to our peers to make sure that, if we saw us going down an avenue, we corrected that immediately.
So this is just an example here of how we defined the SRE responsibilities. I don't think we have time to go through all of these in detail, but the main thing here is that our focus is on features that enhance the site availability, that we do all of the incident management, the change management in terms of gating when things get deployed into production for services that we've taken ownership of, and having dashboards and being responsible for reporting the availability metrics and how well we did against our SLOs to executives and to others. And we also have some various control points. For example, we do an architectural review of all the services. We make sure that there's no single points of failure, and when we find gaps, that work items are created to remediate those gaps. We're often asked to give an opinion on a particular service. If a service is going to get promoted from a beta to a GA to a live service, do we? What's the risk? What's our compliance posture? What are the results of the scorecard? And so we're asked to give recommendations.
And one of the things about control points was we had seen a sister organization do a similar approach, and it didn't work very well. And what they did was they budgeted a team, they turned into the cleanup team I talked about earlier, where they would complete the system test. They would do all the things developers didn't want to do. They became very dissatisfied. And so we wanted to make sure we put these control points in which reflected our values. That said, if we're going to take over incident response, we're going to be the person pushing into production. So, we'd have development come in on 5 o'clock on a Thursday because they got their sprint deliverables done. They push to production, go home, and then something would go haywire the next hour. We'd spend the next 3 hours cleaning up, right? And we basically said we're the ones pushing to production. When you satisfy the policies of, do you have proper test coverage? Do you have proper, use case analysis? How many times have you run this in staging for so long? And how large is the change, right? Is the change, a picture on the website, or is the change, 30 modules and 30 change sets, right? Can you break that up? A lot of times we'd have conversations about breaking it up because we'd had an error budget on one component and not making it say, taking that, impacting that would be huge, right? Yeah. So it's a lot of the control points not going back to your values and not compromising, but being, what do you want to say? Not compromising to the fact that you break it, versus trying to yield and try to do the right thing for the business and not make the development team think that you're too structured.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork in terms of having a leadership team, defining our mission and scope, the values, roles and responsibilities, going out to the stakeholders, reviewing all of these things. The next step is to understand our tools and processes. Now, in all likelihood, most organizations, you already have these things. We did. But, there were some areas where a little bit of consistency was needed, where we had various squads doing things differently. And again, this is from an SRE perspective, so it's not our mission to go out and to prescribe to the service squads what tools they need to use. This is the tools and processes that we use within SRE. Tracking and planning being the first. Obviously, we made a decision pretty early on. We wanted to do our tracking and planning in the same system as the service squad so that we could share work items and issues between the teams and squads. And various tools there to support that, Jira, RTC, Rational Team Concert.
So we took the top one, which everyone should recognize as Grafana. right? And I would show this. We have like weekly development playbacks with the service squads, and that would get them the weekly playback and show them their Grafana data, trying to inflect into the individual development teams, what their service was doing this week, what their changes are, to drive a lot of pride and craftsmanship from the engineers versus just trying to get the new features out. And no one would log on to Grafana afterwards. I wanted to teach the teams to use Grafana, but no one would use it. The developers just didn't care because it was just too much upfront work. And so we actually took all the Grafana monitors and created a bot and dump them into a Slack channel, into the developer Slack channel. So that way, whenever the developers came in on Monday morning or Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning or Saturday morning, they'd actually see if any of the components had gone below a certain targeted SLA. So we wanted to bring the data as close to the developer as possible and also make it relevant. So if the developer was, this is our open toolchain tool, we have a Slack channel for the OTC team to see what's their availability for the week, the day, the month, and they can really start thinking about that and see that data in a tool that they're used to using versus, and I know Grafana is pretty easy for all of us. I mean, I get in there every day, and I get in there and get you to get in there every day, Ritchie. But a lot of the developers just didn't want to sit there and stop and bring up a big black or white graph of our availability and look at all these numbers and try to figure out stuff like that. They just wanted to focus on sprints and new features.
Yeah, yeah. And on the monitoring and availability reporting, again, gap analysis, making sure that we're using a common monitoring solution and notification mechanism. We actually have monitors on every one of our microservices. And as well as recovery procedures that go with the alert keys for each one of those monitors, so the first responders have a checklist of things that they can go through in order to respond to a situation or an incident. We do all of the incident management, which means we build the incident manager rotation. We rotate the call out. An incident manager essentially calls a SWAT and gets on a SWAT for every Sev1 outage and make sure that we have the proper development engineers online or SRE engineers to resolve the problem, and making sure that we have a log of what's going on. So we use Slack to keep a log in real time. As people are trying things out, okay, restarting this service, then we go and we type it in there. So we actually have a timeline that's recorded in the transcript of the team chat that we can then use to build an RCA later. We have an RCA tool that we use. It's an internal tool to actually track what happened, what was the timeline, what was the response, and linkage between the RCA and all of the issues that are being tracked as action items to come out of the RCA to provide us traceability and accountability for those things. Okay, let's move on. We're about 30 minutes in.
Yeah, so what we had and previously we had a really layered approach reactive model where we had a network operations center would receive the alert or customer problem ticket, and we would go through a very structured time frame, and it would take us about an hour or two from the time in which we had the problem till we were actually able to restore service, and that was being a best case situation, and an hour is just way too long. Or 50 minutes. I mean, that's well below 99.5, well below 99.995. So what we did was we took it and created a proactive and a reactive model, which says we still want an operations center, and I subcontract to someone else to have those people that watch a console all day long.
Circle the globe. Yeah.
Circle the globe, but it's not. I mean, I was in the Google presentation earlier. They said, or Netflix. They said they got rid of the displays. We did the same thing. We don't have those big displays like you see in the Pentagon and so forth, right? I don't have that fancy video, but we just have people sitting in cubes watching stuff, and they're really our last line of defense. And what we wanted to do was have multiple entry points, so we could enter into an incident management situation from multiple places. So either the SRE team can see it, the development squad can see it. We actually have a platform engineering team can see it, and we wanted to focus on making sure we had all of our data sources from our event system and our monitoring system plugged into not only into our call center or our operations center, but also into our collaboration tool, so that all the teams could see everything and it was fully transparent, so we could get into the proactive phase where we could actually see a degradation in service, and cycle a server or switch from a primary to secondary load balancer without waiting for that problem ticket or waiting for the actual bad incident to happen.
Right.
And we also wanted to make it so that it was we could have different types of people. We always didn't want to focus on that one guy can always fix the problem, right? That's what we started with. We want to get it to multiple people. And so after about 3 or 4 months, we now have it so that we have both the development team during business hours. They spot something, they just go fix it, right? They don't wait for anyone else. And the same thing with the SRE team. They spot something, they just go fix it straight away. They don't wait for an event to fire. They might tell the operations center, because we're all in the same collaboration tool, that we're currently cycling a server or failing over to a standby server without waiting for a catastrophic event to happen. So it makes things a lot less stressed, I would say, and a lot less fire drill oriented, which is how we entered into this.
Yep. And the key point here is that our technical operations center, this is not necessarily the entry point for every incident. We look at it as it's our last line of defense. So if something happens in the middle of the night and all the SMEs are asleep, they're not watching Slack, obviously, then the TOC will catch it, and then they'll send out an alert. Somebody on rotation will get up, and they can carry out the conversation in the Slack channel until it's resolved. But certainly within daytime hours, they can.
And we also found out we needed multiple, and I know that some people call them incident commanders. We call them incident managers. I feel like if an incident commander, I'm on a cartoon or something. I'm in the military or the Coast Guard. We found that we needed multiple incident managers because of different perspectives. Either the platform had an incident going on and we were impacted, and the platform had the stick to go solve the problem, or we had an incident on our side that was not impacting the platform. So while it may seem we have duplicated, they really have different roles, and the incident managers really need in-depth. Found out that the incident managers need a lot of detail about the service they were managing. They couldn't just come in and project manage it away. Mm-hmm. They needed a lot of detail to figure out what to do. A lot of the times the developers would say, can I reboot this server? Can I restart this service? And they were wanting someone to confirm, yes, that's a good idea. And having the two people on the call really made that a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. So continuing on with the tools, process, and backlog, decide where you're going to do your tracking and planning. First, again, for us, we made the decision that we wanted to be wherever the service squads were. And then build your backlog. Everything else just becomes a backlog item. You don't necessarily have to have every backlog item resolved before you can move on and start expanding out the team. The main thing is you've got the scope of work and your initial set of priorities in front of you that have been reviewed with the development leaders and executives and so forth. So you can start, as you start rotating engineers in, building out the team, your technical leads know what it is that they're going to be working on, and they can go and run with it. And of course, we always work to align our priorities with the needs of the business, and as well as the needs for reliability and availability, and determine what our control points are. As Rob said, we report on our 7-day, our 30-day availability metrics, and system health overall. And obviously, security is something that's non-negotiable, has to get done regardless of development pressure. And then establish what your communication channels are. So for us, we use Slack. We have a lot of channels in Slack, and we have designated channels for availability.
Well, we're a big company, and we have a lot of dependencies. We have storage dependencies, our single sign-on dependencies, and so it's critical for us to our first responders are another group. They're not within our group. And so it's critical for us to have really tight integration over Slack so that we could respond quickly and take advantage of these different groups.
And that people know where to go look if they have a question, or if they want to see what's going on, what's happening with a particular service, why are things misbehaving. They know where to go look and find that information, or to ask a question as well. So now we've really built out the foundation. We've got our backlog. We know what we're going to start working on. It's time to expand the engineering team. For us, it was a decision of, can we hire new, or do we need to do rotational assignments? We do a little bit of both. But we did rotate engineers in from the service squads. And then after doing their stint on SRE, they'll go back to the service squads, and we'll bring new engineers in. The main thing is to make sure, for us, was to make sure that we had the right set of skills within the team, particularly with a rotational model. I mean, it's human nature. We wanted to make sure that the dev managers weren't just sending us their misfits, but that they were sending people over that had the right set of skills for what it is that they were going to be asked.
When you
to
ask
do.
a manager for giving your engineer, they're not going to give you the best engineer, right? They're going to give you the worst engineer,
Right.
Someone they can do it, they don't need to have, right?
Yeah. So a little give and take there in negotiation for sure. And then, for us, we decided to organize both vertically and horizontally, squads and guilds. Hopefully people are familiar with those terms that were coined by Spotify. And so, we have SMEs in the individual services, and in our ideal state, we have those SMEs embedded within the development squads, attending their scrums, taking SRE-related work, and also bringing requirements to them. And then we also have the guilds by discipline. So, for example, the monitoring guild and the security guild. The other one is, a big one is, we want to have redundancy in the skill sets. What I call avoiding the human single points of failure. So just like we build our systems for reliability and high availability, and we have failover, we have to do the same with the humans and with the skills to resolve a problem. So people talk about being one bus hop away from being exposed, where
Lottery ticket away.
I like to say one lottery ticket away, because winning the lottery is so much more fun than getting run over by a bus. But so we're one lottery ticket away from being exposed. We try to avoid that if at all possible.
And when we say build the mindset, I'd like to lead by example. So everyone on the leadership team is on call. Even the project manager on our team is an incident manager, and she goes on call at night and has to deal with incidents. So we don't have anyone on our team that isn't doing some of the similar work, isn't special cases and so forth. So I like leading by example. It reinforces the SRE values. It means when you come in the next morning and the team had a particularly difficult night, you can sit down and go, okay, how do we fix what happened last night? How do we create automation? How do we keep it from happening? We woke up all these people in the middle of the night. Sometimes we woke everybody up because the monitoring system was wrong. Or someone went in and did a disruptive deployment and didn't turn off our monitors, right? And we deal with it in the same way. That happened last week, right? With you, actually. Woke you up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. It's no fun getting woken up for a problem that was self-inflicted and that was expected, and there's nothing you can do about it because it's something lower level. The other one here is just on the culture, right? So we do leadership coaching with the engineers on the squads. Rob and I, we alternate having one-on-ones with the engineers, finding out how are things going, what can we improve. Typical agile, continuous improvement concepts. We have an all-hands meeting every couple of months. We conduct retrospectives, find out what works, what didn't work, what can we improve, what tools and processes do we need to make it better.
So one of the things that we wanted to use was a model where we took a certain percentage of our engineering capacity, approximately 20% of our engineering capacity, and permanently put it in the SRE team. But we also recognized that certain of the services had different maturity levels, and they would quickly outstrip. You'd have one team consume all of the SRE team's resources. So in our HR system, it's very difficult to move people back and forth. It can take weeks. And so what we wanted to do was formalize a rotation where we'd put people on about an 8-month rotation of coming through SRE, and use it as a way to get promotions, use it as a way to get advancement in their career. Have they done their stint in SRE? And you also have to show that they can actually go back. A lot of time rotational assignments, you rotate in and you never rotate out. I think there's a commercial.
The Roach Motel, yeah.
The Roach Motel. They go in there, they never come out again. And we really wanted to rotate people in and out. And when you rotate out, it really shows its rotational model. But we didn't want to give the individual service squads license to not behave, license to write bad code, license to have problems. And so what we did was we created virtual SRE team members in each squad, and it's all based on the availability of that squad service. So that the squad on the far right, of course, is the best one. They are a mature squad. Life is just good. They write their test cases, and we leave them alone. But like on the squad on the left-hand side, the bottom, that's the problem manager I spoke about earlier. He gets the most SRE line items, and he complains, going like, I keep doing your work for you, Rob. But I go like, yeah, but you have 80% of all the incidences, and you constitute 90% of our outages. And so we really wanted to use data-driven metrics to show how we, we were very transparent, and to show how we allocated our with Kanban board, I guess what you call it, activities. And we let Ritchie, who's the guy up on the word prioritization, figure out how to prioritize all those work items in the Kanban board. And then on the bottom, it kind of I gave some examples of the typical SRE backlog items and the feature squad backlog items. And this is the actual picture I use with the development team, so they can understand how we act and why we assign them the work we assign them, whether it be high availability features, my favorite one, rate limiting, or predictive analytics, some monitoring reporting, and so forth.
Okay, so now we've built the team, and it's time to really start implementing, showing better results, and one of the things that again, going back to the thou shalts, or setting the bar so high that it's impossible for a service to meet the bar for you to take over their service, we want it to be more of an iterative approach, that even before we have quote unquote taken over a service, and by taking over a service it means we're at the state where SRE can handle the incident. If our first responders can't handle it, then SRE gets on and does the engineering and the diagnosis, can carry the RCAs all the way through to completion, including implementation of the action items. And we're still working towards that ideal or to-be state. And it also depends on the individual services. We have a lot of services that we are responsible for. And so what we realized was that there's a gradient versus an all or nothing approach to taking on a service. And so we identified it in two levels, level 1 and level 2, where level 1 is just the basic, let's get you guys hooked into our monitoring, reporting, alerting, let's get the call-out rotation established. We own the incident management and the RCAs. We also own the TOC and the first responder service. And we can take that. So that's early success, low-hanging fruit. We should just do it. And then over time, as we acquire the skills and as we close the gaps and as they achieve their metrics on the scorecard, and as resources become available for us to be able to do it, then we can actually get to that full takeover of their service.
And we found that we were trying to train the management team and train our peer managers, and that when they saw that first checklist and all that sort of stuff, they just rolled their eyes and said, we can't do any of that. You just took our resources and you're off building fancy tools. And so we wanted to, as the service matured, we wanted to do more and more. And I know some of the teams talk about consulting with the SRE team, providing an SRE consultant to the service squad, and we tried that method, and it works. It does work, but it works when you have the service squads understand the value of SRE and understand it's a precious resource. And we adopted this approach based on our maturity, nothing more than that. To prove to the teams that we were bringing value, and every month do a little bit more for each of the development teams. And we wanted to get into, instead of saying, no, we can't do something, or here's a milestone, here's a date, and dates were something the development teams really focused on. We wanted to get into a milestone-oriented where it was, yes, when you get this done, we'll be able to do this. And take the narrative and make it a very positive narrative versus always use a carrot versus a stick, right? And
right.
Typically our organization was very stick-focused, and we wanted to turn it into a carrot-focused organization.
Sure, right, because the common question we get from our development managers, our favorite one that Rob's referring to in particular, is when are you going to take the incident response for my service? When are my guys going to stop getting called out? Well, I don't have a date for you for that, but we've gone through and we've looked at your service, and here's your scorecard, and here are the gaps, and let's discuss which of these we think are the highest priority ones and what the time frame is for getting those gaps addressed, and actually taking the information that we've gathered and building out a roadmap that we can work with the services and bring them along and get them to the level of maturity that we feel comfortable taking over their incident response completely. And of course, then taking it to the next level, going beyond just availability and system health to really identifying the key SLIs and the SLOs, and understanding how you're going to measure those and how you're going to make it more reflective of what the user experience is going to be versus just is the system up, and do the monitoring and reporting for that. Oh, wow, we still have the pitfalls. All right, okay. So we're running low on time, so we'll have to go through these very quickly. You want to take the first one, Rob?
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Sure. So a lot of lessons learned were managing expectations. Our executive team, said, go do this. 2 weeks later, they said, why aren't you done? right? And we hadn't even announced it yet. So the executives seemed to have a very short-term memory. And so we wanted to agree on the mission scope. And it was really, SRE became the black hole. All the development leaders were like, oh, they start writing their prioritization for their sprints for the week, and they'd like this little paragraph, SRE will do all the things they don't want to do. They don't want to do testing. They don't want to do performance. They don't want to do scale. They didn't want to do logging. They didn't want to do developing the monitors. And so it was really important for us to get with the development leaders to start off with and write down all the stuff that we are not doing. It's cool to write down what we are doing, but sometimes it's better to write down what you're not doing. Because you become the black hole, the panacea for all the stuff that they don't. It's either really hard and they can't plan it out. It's very disruptive to them, or they just didn't want to do it. The development engineers didn't want to do it. Yeah. And get buy-in from that. We sat down with the key development director for probably about 2 hours, going through that list and almost in a negotiation style. And if I had to do that over again, I'd probably do that in a less adversarial methodology than the one that we ended up doing. And then, of course, there's usual in Agile, crawl, walk, run, is focus every month and knock something off every month and then iterate, and don't try to get to the to-be state in a month. The thing that I did work with the development team, the development executives were on, this is hard, this is going to take a long time, this takes a lot of focus. We should be at this for a year. A lot of times, at least in our team, we would look at things in a month or a 2-month basis, and if you don't get it working in a month, give up that prototype and give up that approach. And we really wanted to show the development team as well as the SRE team we're in it for the long haul, and setting that expectation up front with the executive team that we're at this for a year, we're at this for 2 years, is not something short term.
Yeah, just along that, from what Rob said, going for the obvious things first, hit the low-hanging fruit, get that early success. At least that's what we have tried to do to show immediate results, and then take it to the next level from there. And of course, ruthlessly prioritize the backlog. We found initially we were trying to take on all of the services. We were trying to fulfill everyone's expectations at once, and our velocity suffered as a result of that. And so we had to take a step back and said, what are the 3 or 4 most important things that we should be doing, and get agreement with the dev leaders and executives, and then go off and do those.
Well, one of our development leaders asked, how many pull requests did you do this week? And we were like, I was looking at you going, I don't know, right? So, look at your metrics, and if we gotten ahead of that, knew what our pull requests were, focused our developers on pulling and adding those components in.
Okay.
The last one, is this last one?
Okay. Yeah, and another pitfall for us, we had to make sure that this wasn't just putting a fancy label on dev and ops by, referring to DevOps and SRE. And for some of our engineers, we're pushing them out of their comfort zone. We want to make sure that there's not an us versus them culture. Oh, that's not us, that's development. I can't do that because that's a development item. Also, I've learned it's better to be pragmatic versus purist. We obviously put our SRE principles first, and we're just about out of time, so we'll leave a little bit of time for questions. The most key one here is that SRE is not free, particularly if you're dealing with a fixed set of resources and just changing your organizational structure as we did. It provides...
I'm going to get you to ask for questions.
Okay. All right.
Questions? Anyone have questions? There's the mic. Oh, there, someone has a question.
Hey, name is Bill Cameron from PayPal. Trying to connect 2 things that I heard. At one point you said the words 50-50, and then you talked about tech debt versus new features in your company. Does your company practice half the time reducing tech debt, or did I do it in
well, when we said 50-50, toil versus automation.
For our SRE team in particular.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so yes, we do measure the tech debt, and we do prioritize technical debt over new features. It just seems to be cyclical. Like, we're getting ready for a big conference this week, so the technical debt is going up. But after the conference, the technical debt will go down, right? And that's something that we'll reprioritize in their schedule. But yeah, they're 2 different subjects.
Thank you. Would you be comfortable saying what percentage of time the engineers in your company work on tech debt reduction versus new features?
Well, so
I can tell you the 50-50. Right now we're at 60-40. I do track that, but you may track the other one. I don't.
And again, referring to the SRE team within our development organization. So it's not necessarily representative of the entire company, right? But for our SRE team, we're at about 60-40. We'd like to get it to that 50-50 level. Yeah.
You had what may have been a throwaway comment about how Rob would come to your office every morning and ask you how the
I sit right
service
next
was
to
doing.
him. I sit
that's
right
good
next to him, like he sits here and I sit here.
Ah. So my question was for you. Did you teach him to fish, or how did you get him off your back?
So he was quizzing me to find out how much was I paying attention. We have tools, right? We have the Grafana charts. We have a URL that everybody can go to and they can see it. We also now have the Slack channel that's completely focused on availability, where we have a bot that posts, last night's availability numbers every night. So for me, fishing was not that hard. All I needed to do was just go and look in the channel and see what happened last night.
I also got a 70-inch
But
TV and put it
he
right
was
next to
more
your
just
office.
giving me the test to find out, did I check, right?
Are you guys using war games with your development teams, and is that working?
We do gamify incident management.
Like before the incidents actually happen, sit down scenarios and do a war game with your developers?
Yes, well, certainly with our incident managers, one of the things that we have is a survival guide, right, which tells you everything you need to know about what happens when there's an incident.
And
a
we do
SWAT call.
mock calls.
And we do mock calls, right. So that was one of the things. They just brought me on to the rotation not too long ago. Yep.
You mentioned in passing that you have an RCA tooling. Can you talk a little bit more about what you do? Is it just templating for RCAs, or what do you do?
That's one way you could look at it, is templating. We wrote it. We took some common best practices, like out of IDLE and other places, like the 5 whys. Why did that happen? You keep asking why that happened 5 times, and if you ask it enough times, you'll actually get to the root cause. And we took a lot of that process and just created, worked with our development team, created a Node.js app.
Yeah.
It's just an internal Node.js app on a non-SQL database that we just use to record it.
And we have, tagging, email notifications when an incident got created, categorization, so that we can then go back and report on them, which components had which RCAs and what were the results, what was the MTTA and MTTR, that we can record those sorts of things and extract metrics out of it, and then the 5 whys, and then, ultimately the link to the work that has to happen as a result of that. Any other questions?
Well, thank you. Any other questions?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.